may be remembered as the year when centre-state relations took a tilt in favour of the states. This wasn't just because for the first time a chief minister has come to rule the centre on the strength of his performance in the states. It is also because the 14th Finance Commission has upped the share of the states in the central pool of taxes to 42% from 32% earlier. The Commission appears to be broadly telling the central government that it has no business deciding how states spend their share of the money. What prompted the Commission to up the states' share of money? Are states mature enough to spend the extra money? Is it really extra money or just more control over the same amount of money? Will the new division of money make it tough for the central government to meet its own fiscal deficit target? The Commission's chairman, Y.B. Reddy, should have most of the answers. Dr. Reddy, thank you very much for joining us after a gap of 3 years, Vanvas from the public space?
Yes, I've been careful, I suppose, so far.
You've been way too careful. Well, maybe the union government itself is saying that they had to swerve from their given desirable target of 3.6 because of the risks, the downside risks posed by the Finance Commission. So let me come to, that recommendation of the Finance Commission which has captured headlines. That you have transferred instead of 32%, 42% of the divisible pool to the states. Have you restricted the centre's, the availability of money for the centre?
There are two ways of answering it, yes and no. Let me put it that way. The union government is obligated to transfer taxes under divisible pool as recommended by the Finance Commission. So to the extent that has been increased from 32 to 42, so the union government is now obligated to transfer more resources to the states under the formula. To that extent, this has been in favor of the states and more important, states' freedom, and it restricts the fiscal freedom available to the union in aggregate. But union government's budget has two components. One is what it spends itself. Second is what it transfers to the states. Now it is the decision of the union government to decide how much to transfer to the states and how much to keep for itself. Now when we did our exercise, and technically it is the discretion how much they want to transfer because it is not binding. So in that sense there is a restriction of fiscal space. But what did we do in our assumptions? Because we have to make our assumptions both for the states and the centre. In our assumptions, we expected that given the fiscal position of the union government, they may not be able to transfer in aggregate more than what they have been transferring. Which means there is an implicit assumption in the FFC that the transfers outside the Finance Commission will be reduced to the extent the transfers are happening under the Finance Commission. So in a way, therefore, what happened is to the extent the divisible pool share has increased, the transfers from the union government have necessarily reduced.
Now let me come to, an issue which we don't often raise. I mean, we all tend to bleed for the states. That is the public image. Now, state governments' budgets are not really combed and watched by rating agencies, FIIs, the press, the more evolved press, as much as the central government is. Now if you are going to, transfer much more discretion to the states, is it not possible that that will be more misspent? Because there is less public glare on those funds.
See, that is an assumption.
It is an assumption.
It is an assumption, but there are 2-3 ways in which you can look at it. One, does the Constitution envisage that the centre should transfer money to states to discharge its own functions? No. The constitutional spirit and the spirit of federalism is that in the responsibilities assigned, they will be able to do it. Second. Third, in terms of efficiency of implementation, the difference is instead of the state government deciding where to spend the money, the central government says that you spend it under central sponsor schemes.
Yes.
But who is spending it?
The state is spending.
So implementation inefficiencies will still be there. So all you are doing is taking away the allocation of certain amounts to certain schemes from the state to the centre on the ground that is quote unquote efficient. There the issue is that has to be set off against the possibility that one size fits for all comes in. But this can never be resolved. Let me explain. So therefore, both from the constitutional point of view and from the evidence point of view, we cannot proceed on the assumption that states as a whole are less efficient or more efficient. We are not permitted to proceed on the assumption. We cannot make a judgment. Even assuming that you want to make, some will be above, some will be less than the average. So therefore, that's not the way this Finance Commission went about. Okay. So what we did is, by taking a total view of all the transfers, there was an analysis of various schemes under which the money is being transferred from the union to the state, and we came to the conclusion that there are many transfers that are occurring which are not strictly justifiable either in terms of the constitution or in terms of the first principles, and therefore we have to apply that. Now finally, whether it is true that centre spends more efficiently or less efficiently, the jury is still out.
Yes, that's true, but you have transferred more discretion to a set of entities who are less in the public glare, and we know, whether it is the Bihar fodder scam or, freebies given in Tamil Nadu down to the extent of mixers and starting with slippers and ending with mixers. I mean, they're also guilty of a lot of freebies. By extending the discretion, it is not necessarily a more noble thing to do.
Now, but if you insist on evidence, let me explain that one, remember all the schemes, the many schemes undertaken in the last 10 years were first experimented in the states. They were criticized by the union government that they are populist and waste. Midday meal scheme, rural employment guarantee, public distribution, everything which gained respectability after the states were criticized for taking it. Second, if you take the total expenditure on capital works, the capital works is more in the states than in the center. Three, even if the central government is giving some money as a proportion of the total expenditure spent by a state, if a state is spending X money on education and the central government is giving 0.14, because it's primarily the responsibility of the state. So the judgment, therefore, we felt in this commission that any tariff, whether it is panchayat or anything, whatever statutorily assigned, whoever is accountable is accountable. A higher tier does not necessarily mean that they have either supervisory role or a greater capacity. That is how the law is, and that is how it should be, unless there is evidence that is proved to the contrary.
Don't you think this 14th Finance Commission has been lucky in that at the moment the central government is headed by someone who has been Chief Minister for 10 years, successful Chief Minister, and knows where the shoe pinches, and therefore you were favourably received. Another a previous regime would have probably led to a lot of friction, isn't it?
Well, I can't speculate, but when we started the work and when we ended the work, we had no reference, we had no idea. View, number one. Number two, and the second, interestingly, the second point is that traditionally, whenever the Finance Commission gave the award, it was binding as far as the financial part of it is concerned. So we proceed in the assumption that it will be binding, whichever is the government.
Okay. Well, now let me come back to the fiscal limits and the FRBM targets of the 14th Finance Commission. What I found new was that you are not just setting a percentage of fiscal deficit to GDP, but you are also asking the centre to pass a law whereby there is a debt ceiling. I mean, public debt in India compared to comparable BBB minus countries is much higher. We are, well over 60% of GDP, public debt to GDP, whereas comparable countries are under 40%. You want that tendency to get corrected? That's something new that you have brought in?
No, it's something more fundamental. Okay. If you see the structure of the accountability to the Parliament of the budgetary system in India, no taxation without representation. Yes. No expenditure without authorization. Then the issue is borrowing.
That's right.
Where is the parliamentary accountability come? Does it set a borrowing limit? No, so far. Just look at it. This matter was discussed in the Constituent Assembly.
Constituent Assembly?
Yes. And one point made was that every borrowing should say, I am borrowing for this purpose. There was an opposition saying that the sovereign should have right to borrow for development. Then there was a reconciliation. The reconciliation was by Dr. Ambedkar.
Oh.
And Dr. Ambedkar made a statement, and in fact he said, I cannot visualize a situation where a parliament will not pass a law imposing a ceiling on the total debt that can be incurred. So there is a constitutional provision which says parliament may by law prescribe limits to the debt.
And for 75 years parliaments have not done it.
No, because it said may. It said may. So some people wanted shall. Then Ambedkar said, I cannot imagine somebody will not do it. But that has not been done. And in a sense, therefore, and the FRBM is really, in a sense, the whole thing has to center around the debt because it is for the future generations and for the solvency. So ideally, the totality of the FRBM should have been brought under this constitutional provision. If you bring it under that constitutional provision, it will have a certain legitimacy. It will have certain legitimacy and possibly also can be questioned in terms of its compliance with the totality of the constitutional system. That was not done. So the point that we are making is, when you are replacing FRBM, in the light of our recommendations, please see if that can be done so that it gets a respectability and legitimacy more than what it is existing. And then we felt that while ex post there is supposed to be something which has not been notified, ex ante at least let the budget be examined. Therefore, consistent with global practice, we have recommended a fiscal council.
So would you say that this independent fiscal council and debt ceiling is perhaps the biggest recommendation of the Finance Commission? If you want your favorite in terms of this entire 280 pages of recommend, what would be?
I think basically very important things are institutions, and this is creation of institutions, which I think will be critical to demonstrate the commitment of the government to fiscal response as it defines. We are not saying it should be 3%.
Well, on that note, we will take a break, but that is a nice point to get Dr. Reddy to speak about the other developments from the Reserve Bank, the monetary policy framework, and other institutions that have cropped up while he has been busy with the Finance Commission.